Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Ruby and Beyond. I was really impressed by the feedback that you provided me after the first video, and I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for encouraging me to record more, to do my best. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So I still learn to record videos I never did before, but in this episode I hope that the picture and the sound will be better compared to the first one. I will try to speak slower because I'm not an English speaker, not a native English speaker, and my pronunciation is not perfect, but believe me, I do my best for you to understand me well. In this episode, we will observe a relatively big code base. It will be the Rails application. This is called Maybe. And it should be at least twice fun to observe the Rails application. Why? Because Rails is my primary occupation for the last 15 years. But at the same time, my responsibility is also doubled because I'm a Rails developer and this episode should be just perfect. Before going to the codebase itself, let me give you a brief, short history about what is Maybe and why it's now written in Rails. So long story short, Maybe is a personal finance and wealth management application that started in 2021 as a Next.js React application, and it was under heavy development within 2021 and 2022. And since business side of the project didn't work out well, the team stopped development of the application somewhere in mid-2023. So, however, the team didn't just bury the project how it usually happens with startups that didn't work out. Instead, they decided to open the codebase and to make it open source and to open the repository on the GitHub. And this might be the end of the story, but no. At February 1st, Josh Pigford, the man who finally made Rails version of Maybe, he posted on his Twitter account that he rebuilt his personal website with Rails in just a weekend. And he also asked his audience about whether he should or not rewrite Maybe with Rails. And on the February 2nd, he announced, still on Twitter, and I will publish the link to this post in the description of the video, that he's going to rewrite Maybe on Rails. Let me be honest with you, I didn't know anything about Josh and Maybe before this post. And I remember my emotions when I first time saw this. I said to myself, wow, this man is crazy, because he wants to rewrite his startup and even to rewrite it as an open source with completely different technology. But after 2 months of the development of Rails version, now it has 26,000 stars on the GitHub, 67 developers committed to its codebase, and this makes it just a perfect candidate for this episode. So let's go and see what is the current status of Maybe, what problems it has, and how it works. Okay, I already started the application and it works very well. And at the beginning of the video, let's make sure that I have the latest version of the codebase. Yeah, everything is good. As I told you, after the first episode, I made some changes. So in this episode, I will try to break this long video into some logical sections that will allow you to better understand what I'm talking about and better navigate through rather long video file. Okay, and let's start with some general aspects of the codebase. As I told you in episode 1, I have I usually define some entry points that allow me to understand better the code that I see for the first time. For Rails applications, such entry points are, of course, gem file and routes file. So let's start with gem file. In gem file, we see that maybe uses the head version of Rails. I think that it's a rather controversial decision. So first of all, I don't see any reason to do this in a code base that is fresh, that has been started only 2 months ago, and using Rails 7.2 now doesn't bring you any innovation out of the box. So you already have Docker file included in 7.1, you already have all new features, you already have everything, and at least at this time, 7.2 will not give you any performance boost or any, I don't know, anything that will make your code base better or make your development process better, faster. So no reason to do it now. I know that in Shopify, for example, in Shopify, they use head branch of Rails, but Shopify is the biggest Rails monolith in the world, and maybe it's just in the beginning of its path. Okay, anyway, now let's go and take a look what we have in schema. And in schema, or better, let's use Table Plus. I love Table Plus, by the way. It's one of the best applications to work with database. So in Table Plus, we can see that instead of using sequential IDs, Rails maybe uses UUID as a primary key in all tables in the database. Again, I cannot agree with this, and I don't see any reason to do this. So UUIDs are good when you have to deal with distributed database and you want your IDs to be unique within distributed database. In a case where you, again, at the beginning of your path, at the beginning of your way, and you don't deal with some distributed system, I think that UUIDs bring only cons. So first of all, they are not orderable. So you cannot order by ID. You always will have to order by created at or any other column. At the same time, they are not user friendly. So just imagine when your client will sell you, or your client or your I don't know, your developer, your colleague will tell you, I have a problem with account 38CAB8AA, and then just a bunch of other letters and numbers. It doesn't tell you anything. At the same time, if your colleague will say, I have a problem with account number 10 or 5 or even 55, it is easier to understand him, and it's just faster to help him. So again, I see no reason to use UUIDs. Maybe the idea was to use it because in the original version of maybe they were used. Okay, and another reason can be because authors want to hide how many records they have in a database. Yes, this makes sense. Of course, this makes sense. But this makes sense only when we have a SaaS solution. And as we know, at least as far as I understand, maybe it's considered to be a standalone solution that you will be able to install on your local server. So again, no reason for me to have UUIDs here. Okay, let's go to models. So of course, when we deal with an application that is considered to be a financial application, one of the core model will be an account. And yes, here account, we have a model that's called account, and what I think we should speak about is this line that has a delegated type method called. So what is delegated type? Delegated type is a replacement for polymorphic models. So before Rails 6.1, this line could look like just an association, so belongs to accountable, polymorphic true, dependent, destroy. With Rails 6.1, you can use delegated type. So delegated type is just a thing that is built above the polymorphic association, and it has some pros compared to belongs to. So let me show you what it allows you to do. For this, let's open the console, and on console, let's find the first account that we have. Oh, the last. It doesn't again matter. Account last. Yeah, let's do account last. And you see here, by default, Rails orders records by an ID, and we know that ID is a UUID, so it doesn't really. So this account is not really the last account that has been created. It's account that has been somehow ordered by UUID. It's not the last. It's not the first. It's just some account. So again, another reason why not to use UUID as the primary key. But we're talking about polymorphic association. So here, account. And let's call. I didn't show you what is inside accountable types constant. So inside accountable types, there is a list of classes that can be associated with an account. On a database level, it looks like we have an account table, and we have number of tables that which names start with account and underscore, and it has additional fields that can be different for each account type. So currently, the only account types that are really implemented and really supported are balances. I believe, and probably that's all. So everything else exists just because they're designed to be different accounts, different types in future. But the real thing is that only balance has some specific for it fields that exist in this table. All other account types are just records that don't have any additional information. Okay, but anyway, let's try to use methods that has been generated with delegated types. So account depository. Why I call this method? Because we have a class that is named account depository, and as I told you, delegated type has some perks compared to just polymorphic association. So one of these perks is that it creates automatically these getter methods with question mark at the end. And besides generating this getter method, let me show you one method that works and returns true here. So this account is accountable type colon has value account long here. So account long in this case will return true. So besides generating this getter method, it also generates scopes, which I find very useful. So account long scope will return only those accounts which have account type equal to account long. Okay, so now we know how delegated type works, and just extremely useful thing here. Okay, another thing that I noticed is that tests in maybe run in parallel. This feature is, again, it's out-of-the-box feature for mini-test and active support test case in Rails. And to use it, what you should do, you should open your test helper and find the parallelize method call, or if it's not here, you should add it here. And as an argument, you can pass number of workers that you want your test to start. So in this case, as you see, I want to start as much workers as possible, and let's see how it works in in our console. So let's use binrails test command, and you see it starts testing in 8 parallel processes. So, and tests are very fast, and maybe I know that you may say there are only about 400 assertions. It's nothing. Yes, it's not much. It's not much, but still, if we will disable parallel execution of test suite and will run tests just in one process, it will take about, I believe, 10 seconds or something. I don't remember. 9 seconds. So 2.5 times slower compared to parallel execution of tests. Nice. But what I don't like in this approach is that it creates additional databases even in development. So instead of having one database, maybe test, I now have 8 databases. So I think that maybe it will be better if this line will look like will include additional if case that will check that we work in CI environment, because in CI it makes sense to run tests as fast as possible. In development, we usually don't run the full suite. We'll usually run only selected tests or selected files, but not the whole suite, and it makes no sense to start 8 processes or I don't know how many processes. So maybe I'm not sure if this is the default line in Rails 7.1, just because I don't use mini tests, I use specs. But if so, maybe it would be better to add this if case to this line, and I will check and maybe open a pull request. Okay, let's go back to the gem file. I just want you to demonstrate the last thing here. So the last thing is that the last point is that maybe has very small amount of dependencies. So just one screen. I don't use any scrolling to see all the dependencies for the application. Yes, there are development and test dependencies, but we're talking about runtime dependencies. So for runtime, just one screen, not too much. It's good. This is how I like to keep my gem files. I try to have as little dependencies as possible. Okay, now the next section is database, or better say databases. And I will tell you why. Okay, we will continue to observe gem file. So as you probably see here, we have in driver section. By the way, it's a good approach to divide gem file into logical sections like Rails, drivers, deployment, assets, and anything else. I usually divide my gem file into alphabet order, but I would say that I like this organization. So here, what we have as a database, as I already mentioned, maybe uses Postgres. And I'm a big fan of Postgres. I use it everywhere. But in this case, in this particular application, I would say that SQLite would be a better solution. Why? Because again, maybe it's considered to be an application that you will install locally on your own server, and you will have your own installation. So instead of having a Rails application, a Ruby application, yes, and Postgres, with SQLite you will have only Ruby application. It's just easier to maintain, easier to install. So I see no reason why Postgres should be used in this case. Besides this, I searched over the code base and I don't see anything. First of all, there is no custom SQL queries anywhere in the database. Not custom, but raw SQL queries. I don't see any Postgres specific features that I used, at least now. So now I think it's just the perfect time to switch to SQLite, especially when SQLite is actually has a lot of hype in Rails world and Ruby world, it would be great to switch this application to SQLite, and it would be easier to maintain this in future. Of course, if it is considered to be an application that will be installed locally. Okay. The next database that is used here is Redis, and with Redis, the problem is that, not the problem, but the fact is that Redis is not used anywhere. So it seems that what can be done, we can just delete it, bundle, and nothing will change. Yes. And we have one dependency less now. So we can just get rid of Redis and not use this in this project. Maybe the only reason why Postgres exists here is because of these EUIDs. But again, we can get rid of Postgres, get rid of EUIDs, and in this particular case, this code base will become better, and this application will become more usable, more user-friendly, and more easy to install. Okay, the next section that we will cover is background processing. And what do you usually think about when you when you talk or when you think about background processing in Ruby? I usually consider using Sidekick. But here, no, not we, but authors of maybe, they use GoodJob, and GoodJob is actually an excellent library. First of all, it doesn't use Redis. So I love this approach because just one dependency less compared to Sidekick that uses Redis. GoodJob is concurrently. It supports ACID and advisory logs, and it extremely good uses Postgres. So let me show you. So this is a table that compares GoodJob to another background process library, and here you see even with SolidQ, it has number of things that are implemented better. So it's multi-threaded, it's completely multi-threaded. And it uses listen and notify features of Postgres compared to just polling the database for new jobs. This is how it implemented in SolidQ. But again, in this case, if at least my advice would be to switch to SQLite, another advice that I will provide would be switch to SolidQ. Why? Because it supports SQLite out of the box. And in this case, you will have just one dependency, which is Ruby. You will not be dependent from Postgres. You will not be dependent from Redis. This will minimize number of dependencies. This will minimize things that can break down in the application, and it will make maybe better. Okay, let's go to the next section. The next section is security. Security is a thing that you should always care about, but especially you should care about the security when you deal with an application that is considered to be a finance application, and maybe is considered to be a finance application. So what are some basic things for security in web in 2024? Of course, it's ability to add two-factor authentication. I'm not even talking about mandatory two-factor authentication. I'm not talking about just some passwordless or passkey authentication. Just two-factor is good. So maybe it doesn't have two-factor out of the box, and let me show you why. Because maybe has secure password and generate token for features from Rails. So what does it mean? That means that all authentication in this application is built from scratch. Let's go to sessions controller and see how it's implemented. So here you see on line 8, we use the authenticated by method from a user model, and if everything is okay, if email exists and password matches the record in the database, we use login method that is defined in authentication concern. And what it does, it sets current attribute, user current attribute, and resets the session and saves user ID in the session. It's very simple. It's very easy to understand what is going on, and it's very easy to change this. But of course, besides all these pros, there are some cons, and in this case, cons are that you will have to implement all the features from scratch. Let's open passwords controller, and I will show you what I'm talking about. So, not passwords, but password resets controller. So here, if we need to create a password reset email, if we need to send a password reset email, what we should do, we should use generate token flow method from user, send this email. But even here, there are things that authors of maybe don't care about. For example, they don't care about expiration of this email. They don't care about expiration of this token. I'm pretty sure that they don't care, and they should. Again, because this financial application, even with a local installation, in future, I know that they have plans to implement synchronization with different banks and other financial applications. And in this case, it may have information that should be protected. So better implement some basic security features right now. And the first feature that should be done, of course, is two-factor. So Kafka two-factor can be implemented. There are actually two ways. The first way is to implement it from scratch, build it from scratch. And the second way is to use some existing authentication solution. And I think that it's better, at least for maybe, it's better to use some existing authentication Rails solution. There are a bunch of authentication libraries for Rails now. For a long time, my favorite library was AuthLogic. But again, AuthLogic doesn't have all these modern authentication features out of the box. Now I use Rodauth. Why? Because I love an approach that Rodauth implements. I love an approach of decoupling authentication from your main application. I love the approach when authentication is just a Rails middleware compared to approach when it's included into the main application codebase. If you like this, you can use Rodauth. If you don't like this, you of course can use Device, which has all the authentication features, and it's actually a great library. But I just love Rodauth more. So anyway, I advise code owners to switch to some pre-built, let's call it this way, pre-built authentication solution right now. Besides this, besides two-factor, of course, they should care about other security features. And there is a great pull request opened by my Twitter friend, Greg Molnar, in maybe repository. And he suggested everything that can be done. So rate limiting for authentication points, yes. Increasing password complexity and validating passwords against leaked passwords database, yes. Encrypting some data in the fields in the database, yes. This all can and should be implemented in future. So if you have a free time and you want to participate in a great Rails open source project, you can start with this issue. And we're going to the next section in our video, and it's called linting. Okay, what can I tell you about lints in maybe? First of all, they do exist. Why? Because maybe uses the head Rails version, and currently Rails head and Rails 7.2 will have some lints out of the box. So what lints? Brakeman, import map audit, and Rubacop. Brakeman will have a bit stricter config because I opened a pull request in Rails and that has been merged to the main branch maybe a month or a month and a half ago, and I just added some stricter arguments to Brakeman. But anyway, the good thing to know is that now Rails have lints out of the box. What it doesn't have is linting for HTML templates. So maybe uses ERB, and it's good that it uses ERB because even I use Slim for a long time, now I prefer ERB because it's just easier. And how can we lint ERB with ERB lint? Yes. I tried to include ERB lint into Rails, and it was a very funny pull request, very fun pull request, because Rafael Franca, who actually is a maintainer of ERB lint, says that he don't want his gem to be included into Rails because the code base of ERB lint does not fit the modern standards of Rails community, and it's fine. Even if ERB lint is not included in Rails as a default gem, it's completely fine to use it in your Rails application. So I will add ERB lint here. Let's do bundle, and now we can run ERB lint over HTML templates in maybe code base. So let's run it against all HTML files here. ERB lint. Sorry, I forgot to use bundle exec, of course. What is going on here? Why it doesn't work? Let me check. It's around here. Bundle exec ERB lint. Okay, it works. So most of these offenses can be fixed automatically, most of these errors. So let's do this with -a option, and only two things need to be fixed manually. So let's do this, and just to make sure that we have good looking templates. Okay, so autocomplete attribute is not defined in input, which is not good, and let's have it value off, and the same should be added to another filter. Yes, autocomplete off. Cool. Now all files now pass lints without any errors. What else can be done on this step? We can add ERB lint to CI and scan Ruby, scan GS, lint. So this is Rubacop. Okay, we can use lint Ruby. We can rename this step to lint Ruby. And we can implement another step that will be named as lint templates. And we should do checkout. We should set up Ruby from Ruby version and lint ERB templates Yes, but we don't have a bin stub in bin folder. So what we will do, we will use bundle exec bin stub command to bin stub yerbillint bins. What is going on here? Bundle bin stub, of course. And bundle bin stubs. Bin stubs. Okay, now we have yerbillint. Let's check it. Yes, we have yerbillint. Cool. Now let's just make sure that everything passes. Yeah, every file passes linting, so we're done. Probably I will open pull request, my first pull request, and maybe code base after this video. Cool. Let's go to the next section, and the next section is setup. So what I can tell you about setup of maybe. I started this application in 5 minutes. Everything works well, and what I really like is that the gem file, they have this section that is called local development setups that helps me and all other developers to set up this application locally. So there is a script, not the script but a set of commands that should be executed to make application run locally, which includes bin setup and bin def, and even they have some demo data that can be loaded into your local database, which is good. And they even didn't forget about email, like username and password that can be used in a local environment. I use this email and password, and you see I successfully signed into the application and everything's good. What is not good, but what should be also added, what should be also done is an instruction, or better, not instruction, but a script to set up maybe on a server. So currently what do exist, there is an instruction that says how to set up maybe you should update, run apt-get update, apt-get install all the dependencies, install Postgres, install Ruby, install everything else. And yes, after this you will be able to run Postgres on your Linux server, which is good. Thank you very much for this. Thank you all the contributors. But what would be better, of course, would be better to have one command that you will execute, and it will set up Docker, build an image of maybe, and run this image in Docker. It probably with Traffic or any other server. It will just simplify things significantly. Again, maybe this will be done in some further development. It's just my suggestion to code authors to do this. And an example of how this can be done, of course, the best example is once. Campfire once product has once command that sets up everything and runs once on your remote server. Another example is GitLab. GitLab, you can install GitLab Community Edition on your Linux server, run it for your own purposes, and yes, they also have a command that sets up everything and starts GitLab. Okay, now let's go to the final section of the video. And the final section is called Things That I Learned from this code base. So the first thing is that by observing this code base, I now know that somewhere in future maybe we'll support family accounts as an option. So here you see we have belongs to family association, and even in database maybe already has support for families. So here are 2 families in my local database, and in settings you can even change your family name, which is good, which is what is not implemented now. At least I don't understand something. I don't see an ability to add additional users to my family. Again, maybe this will be done in future, just like the approach to create something even to implement some features on some basic level, even they are not fully finished. Another thing that I learned from this database, from this code base, is a gem that is called inline SVG. So what it does, it works very simple. It allows you to include SVG files into your HTML templates. When I use SVG icons, what I usually do, I copy and paste HTML markup of SVG icon directly into the template, or I use some helper that does it. It doesn't matter. This gem allows you to include icons that exists into your repository in your repository to your templates. It's just great. It's a small example of how developers can simplify their life. Besides this, there is also a gem that is called, let me find it. Let me find it somewhere here. Yeah, it's called Lucid Rails. And what it does, it includes all Lucid SVG files into Rails. And yeah, it's another example of small library that does a lot. What I want to tell you at the end of this video. So first of all, thank you very much all maybe developers, maintainers, everybody who is inside of this project for creating this application. Why? Because more application in Rails we have, more popular Rails will become, more open source application we have in Rails, more popular Rails will become within developers. So it's just excellent example of how popularity can increase. What else I can say is that now, first of all, you did a great job, a very big job. For 2 months as you created an application, fully open source application that even now can be used to track your personal finances. It's a great example of productivity and a great example of development speed that can be achieved with Rails. Also, there are several things that can be improved. I already mentioned them in this video. So security can be improved. I would suggest doing some architectural changes, including changing the database and getting rid of Postgres and Redis. This will make application better, at least I think so, if I completely understand what you're building. But anyway, it's a great example. It was a pleasure to observe the code base. It was a pleasure to get to know maybe better, and I hope that this application will exist for a long time. Thank you. See you in the next video.